Major polling has just dropped. Resolve Political Monitor has Peter Dutton ahead of Anthony Albanese as preferred Prime Minister, 36 to 35. According to the poll in 9 newspapers, Dutton is making significant gains and has not suffered a backlash on his climate stance or immigration.
Now, the poll showed that 40% of voters now rank Dutton and the coalition as the best to manage the economy, with only 24% naming Albanese and Labor. Meanwhile, 42% favoured Dutton and the coalition to manage national security and defence, compared with just 23% for Albanese and his Labor Party.
Well, this is incredible, isn't it, James? I think what it shows is that Peter Dutton's policies are starting to cut through to voters here. Now, sure, it's a very narrow lead as preferred Prime Minister. It's only 1 point, 36 to 35. And sure, that would be a huge boost to Peter Dutton. It means that he is certainly on the right track. But I think what's more important in this scenario to look at is the shift in the coalition's favour when it comes to key vote-driving issues. Number one, obviously, being energy. We know that the coalition are taking that nuclear policy to the election, and clearly people care more about how they're going to be able to bring their power bills down, which is rightly so, than this renewables push that we seem to hear about all the time. But also on migration, cutting back migration to 140,000 a year. People are going, well, I can't find a home. The rental queues are so long. What's the solution? So clearly this is a standout, and it's a difference between Labor and to go to the next election with.
There's some really interesting things from this poll, one of which is that Labor's vote, the primary vote, is now at 28%, which is the lowest it's ever been in the history of this particular Resolve poll. But as you said, the coalition lead on things like you would expect them to: cost of living, national security. Those are traditional coalition policy areas that they lead on. But in terms of the environment, 24% of people said they trusted Labor the most to do the right thing, compared to 22% for the coalition. Now, it used to be a 15-point difference. That's now to just 2 points of difference. So even on energy policy, which is supposed to be Labor's big strength, people are judging them to be neck and neck with the coalition.
And I know we're going to talk about this later on in the show, but you had last week the Teals. They were up in arms, Labor up in arms about what's Peter Dutton going to be doing about climate targets. Is he going to ditch them altogether? Is he going to try and look to 2030? But what does this poll prove, James? That people don't seem to generally care about these targets. It's more about how am I going to pay my power bills the next day, for the next month.
Who would have imagined?
Who would have thought? I mean, it's astonishing, isn't it, that you needed a poll to tell you this?
Well, when ideology meets reality, people are not going to vote for ideology. They're going to vote for reality. So you've got the climate ideology that we must do these things in order to lower the temperature of the planet versus someone's power bill right in front of them.
Correct.
And people will say what they want, but when they've got their power bill there and they can't afford to pay it, all of a sudden the climate is not that important. The other interesting thing from this poll, just quickly, is the Greens vote has actually gone up from 12% to 14%. And speaking of the environment, the Greens haven't had much to say on the environment since October 7. All they've talked about is Palestine, but they seem to have got a bump, which from my point of view is quite worrying to think the way they've been carrying on has resulted in a bump in the polls.
Well, you know what it means? It means in the event of Labor minority, you will have the de facto Prime Minister Adam Bandt. And that is a disaster for this country. But also another poll that came out today, James, shows that public approval of Labor's handling of the cost of living crisis has actually fallen a bit. Who would have thought? What a concept. And that's despite the fact that we've heard this for the last 2 years.
A plan to address cost of living. Take pressure off cost of living. Pressure off the cost of living. The cost of living. Cost of living. Cost of living relief. Downward pressure on cost of living. We are doing something about cost of living.
Cost of living, James. That was what Labor was elected. The mandate was to fix the cost of living crisis. And if you remember, Anthony Albanese stood there on the night that he was elected and he pledged for a better Australia. And what has actually happened? We've become a poorer country since he has been in charge.
Well, I mean, he's been true to his word. He's done something about the cost of living. He's jacked it up at every opportunity. So, and people are awake to it.
But it's quite the CV. Rents are up 8.5% higher than this time last year. First home buyers are at their lowest level in a decade. Power bills, as we just mentioned, are up 20%. There's been 12 interest rate hikes, persistent high inflation. And what did Albanese do? He spent $450 million million on the failed Voice referendum.
Well, the interesting thing about this is that people don't trust the government on cost of living, and yet it's only a few weeks ago that we all got a $300 power rebate, that there were significant welfare handouts, there were tax cuts. That sugar hit was very short-lived. It was more of what's that sugar subsidy that you get, Equal or something like that?
Equal, yeah, the one you put in your pocket.
It was more of an equal hit than a sugar hit.
Yeah.
It really has done nothing at all for the government.
No.
And so you wonder what more they can do between now and election for them to make a difference in that area.
No, well, speaking of energy, after a week of political climate brawling, the opposition leader has declared that he would scrap Labor's 2030 emissions target if it helped with the cost of living crisis.
And we're fully signed up to net zero by 2050. But if you think it's a linear progression, they will cripple the economy. So I think we have a look at all of that information, and if there are settings that we need to change, then we would change them if it means helping families with the cost of living crisis that Labor has created.
So that was Peter Dutton. Penny Wong told the ABC this morning that Dutton's decision would in fact send energy prices higher, as well as upsetting our Pacific neighbours. Have a listen.
Mr Dutton's walking away from climate action again is a recipe for higher energy bills in Australia, and I'll come back to that. It is also him yet again abandoning the field in the Pacific. I still get when I move around the Pacific, people remembering him joking about climate change by talking about water lapping at the door of Pacific nations. People still remember that.
So Penny Wong warns that Dutton's nuclear idea is going to send energy prices up, to which everyone would rightly respond, prices up compared to what? Compared to your prices. So Labor have no argument at all when it comes to energy prices.
No.
Remember, they were going to go down by $275.
Oh, that's right. Whatever happened to that one?
Well, Labor quickly forgot about that, and then they boasted that they've actually saved us money because prices did go up, but not as much as they would have had it not been for Labor's policies. And now they simply say, well, Dutton's going to cause prices to go up. Well, compared to what Labor have done, no one believes Labor on energy. And as for Penny Wong's warning that, well, what will our Pacific neighbours think of us? I'm not that sure that people in the suburbs care what the Prime Minister of Tonga thinks about Australia. They want to pay their energy bill. Right now it's cold in Queensland and people are debating, can I afford to turn my heating on or not? We're not that worried, Penny, about what the people in the Pacific think about us.
No, Penrith's certainly not out there concerned about what Tonga or Samoa think right at this moment. They're worried about, again, how they are going to be able to pay for their bills. But the thing is that the energy market operator has already said, James, that coal generation will have exited the system within 15 years and that Australia will not be able to build and install enough renewable energy generation to meet the country's 2030 target. The warnings are there that our renewable energy push is happening back to front. They've also said that the power grid faces the real possibility that ageing coal-fired power plants will drop out before sufficient generation capacity and transmission lines are in place.
Well, this is why Dutton's proposal to not set any targets in concrete for 2030 is very smart, because he's left the focus on the government set these targets, so it behoves the government to meet these targets or explain why they have not. So for Dutton to set no target is smart, because otherwise he makes himself the issue, right? The other thing, and we'll have Matt Canavan on later, and I know Matt Canavan is a great proponent of scrapping net zero completely, but I think Dutton is wise not to do that at this stage, because again he would make himself the issue. Right now he's got the government on the back foot because they've got this energy policy and clearly it's failing by every measure. So keep the pressure on. And as for people wanting to know, well, where will these nuclear reactors go? Well, we know where they'll go. They'll go where there are currently coal-fired power stations. So, and as we said with those polls earlier, Dutton is only improving in the polls.
Absolutely. I was going to say, according to the polls, people are not worried or scared about nuclear, no matter what.